I'm just going to go ahead and get this started off. Who knows the difference between historical and fantastical costuming? All right. What we're gonna consider historical in this panel, it's going to be something that's very period piece that you would see in history. It might be also something that's based on like culture, basically the cultural dress. There's many different variations depending on time periods, and there's been time periods since the beginning of time, since man existed. Example of this would be like military uniforms and Victorian age attire. What we can consider fantastical in this panel is anything that's from like a fantasy or most of the time fictional genre. I don't want to, because there's modern day fictional dramas that wear modern day dress, so that's a little bit, but you get what I'm saying. Sometimes historical has some historical elements in fantastical costumes, but when they're not, sometimes they mix different periods as well. So anything that mixes different periods in one costume is considered fantastical in this group. Usually it's more whimsical garb, such as like capes, cloaks, fairy wings. Not all anime, but majority of anime is considered fantastical. Science fiction costumes. What we're going to do at this panel, I'm going to let all of you decide what would be better for which category, which I'm going to name off. Like the first one is going to be which is more common that you see. Is it fantastical garb or period piece garb? And it could be for these reasons or that reasons. Like, for example, I can say, well, I think historical garb is more common because you see it in more movies. But another person can argue, well, it's more easier to do fantastical garb, and therefore a lot more people were at conventions or and more people have access to it than just plain old historical garb. So that's our first topic. Would anybody like to add their viewpoints on to whether historical or fantastical is more common? Well, yeah, I get that it is more popular. It's true. And that has period piece elements, but it's not quite. It's more whimsical. Yes?
I feel like fantastical is more popular because even if like a movie studio is doing like a historical movie, they're still gonna romanticize it to make it more entertaining. And one of the things they're gonna romanticize is the costumes. Like they're gonna make them like brighter, or everyone's gonna have these neat costumes instead of maybe what historically they wore, which might not have been quite as nice. So I think fantastical shows up.
All right, anybody else would like to add to that?
Fantastic pops out. Whereas when you're at a convention, it draws to your eye the person walking around in the giant robot suit, or the person in the dark thing with the big scythe walking around in the skull mask. That will draw your eye. And I think that maybe it's not more popular, but more noticeable.
That's a good point. Yes?
I think it could also be a way to make sure that you don't get an argument with people, because one person could wear a fantastical, but one person could wear a historical piece, and somebody was like, that's not the right historical piece, but they could wear a fantastical piece that's based off the historical part, and no one would really bother that. So that's not right. Like, I made it, I added my own imagination.
It's a good way to avoid cosplay drama.
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to add to that? Or, yes?
I think Fantastical is a little bit more popular because it goes across multiple genres. Like you have video games, you have movies, you have TV shows, all sorts of things. So you have more people coming in and belonging to something. And there's not too many like historical across the board things to inspire.
Anyone else? Would anybody like to argue the historical point of that? Historical costume more common? Alright, I guess we're all in unanimous agreement that Fantastical wins for which is more common. Alright. Okay, now our next topic of debate. Which is more complicated to make? Yes.
A lot of the historical costumes, you need references. You don't have to, like, for a lot of the, they don't have photography. A lot of it's, you have to rely on portraits, on what's documented. There's no real guarantee that what you've got is even going to be accurate based on your records.
Okay, so do you say historical is more complicated? Yes.
I would say Fantastical is more complicated because while like the details of what someone's wearing, like you might think to get the details right for history, well that they might actually be a little more lenient because like historically maybe the people back then didn't always wear like exactly how it looks like in the pictures that they took. Like we don't all look like people are gonna look back to the year 2010, look at our magazines, look at our fashion, and they're gonna think we all dressed that way even when we didn't. But for Fantastical, it's not making normal clothes. A lot of times it's adding these big, huge things to normal clothes that you have to make out of materials that people don't normally make clothes out of. Like you can make a regular historical suit out of what people actually make clothes out of and actually sell, but then you might have to make like this big helmet, big sword, big whatever, and you can't make that out of normal stuff, so you have to improvise, you have to put cardboard or tape or styrofoam. You have to basically get more creative to create fantastical clothes rather than historical clothes.
Yes.
I'm gonna say that fantastical garb is harder to make in general because I can find patterns for historical garb generally. And that can come from theater companies, from Renaissance fairs, and those are pretty widely available. But for an individual character that you're trying to cosplay as, it's hard to find current or new designs that accurately represent each piece of clothing that they have.
And that's if you're cosplaying a main character. If you're doing a minor character that has like one or two scenes, and they're not even very up close scenes, then you're having to look for things like art books or like really, really good stills from films. So I mean, at least in historical things, you can look at old magazine ads, old photos, things of that nature. Whereas with Fantastical, it just depends on the character that you're cosplaying. Like I cosplay a lot of minor or side characters, and it's really hard to find references. You have to do a lot more digging.
That brings up a good point because there's not as many references where like you can draw from many references when it gets to historical. Here, I'm actually going to show you this is some examples I have of what a historical costume would look like. I apologize for my thing down there. Which is basically the very cultural, traditional garb and very period piece look. And this is some examples of fantastical costume. As you can see, like these garbs are kind of based off of period piece, but of course they've been glammed out into a very fantastical way. We already did that one. Did anybody want to add more to this topic?
I think historical ones are more complicated to make because you don't have as many excuses for being wrong.
It's true. I will do a rude gesture, but this is an all ages panel, sir.
I shake my fist at you.
Historical, it could be a little bit harder because some of the ways they don't make the clothes don't exist anymore. Like, it would be harder to make it, but they would also give you a little bit more key insight. Like, you can't make it like they used to. You can't use the color, you can't use the fabrics and patterns. Nobody knows how to stitch that way. And that would be a hard way, but also for a lenient way.
Anybody else? Yes?
I think it depends. They both have different costumes, which can be kind of like if you do a old historical like frock, which is kind of like Etiquette's dress, and then you have other fantastical characters like you just do an elf, which is like the ears and long hair. So depending on what it is that you're trying to create, depends on the level of how complicated it is.
Alright, I think we're, anybody else? Okay, any points? Well, I think we're kind of at a standstill for this one. It's kind of a tie with this. But costuming is just hard in general. Alright. Which is more family friendly?
Historical.
Historical.
Yes.
I'd say fantastical, because really, historical is not family friendly. Real history is not family friendly. Like, I guess, like, well, not so much how the costumes look, but I guess for cosplay, like, if you want to act like how people in the past did, they're not up to date on their civil rights.
Like the Rococo period. You don't want to act like how they.
On the other hand, question, or you could say fantastical, but you would also have to figure out where you want to be. Like Lord of the Rings, that would be like dressing up your kids as hobbits. That would be family friendly, or but not having them as like fairy tale, I would say like not Sinister, or something worse.
Someone could also argue the point that if you dress them up as hobbits, because there's violence in the movie, you're enforcing violence upon them.
They're raising chickens.
Yeah. Unless they tell them only Hobbiton stories. Well, no, there's been some bloody stories in Hobbiton too, but this isn't a Hobbit kennel. Anyways, yes. Anybody else?
Historical's got to be more family friendly because while there are all these things that did happen in the past, a lot of the smaller children won't know that, and they'll look at the pretty costumes and they'll say, "Wow, that's really pretty." On the other hand, I'm pretty sure everyone saw that Silent Hill cosplayer walking around that scared the living daylights out of everybody.
And there's the guy with the big triangle.
Anybody else like to add?
2 words. Fan service.
Oh yeah.
It's more common in fantastical.
That is true, and that is something I try to have people avoid. Like, if you want to go off, do your own little private photo shoot, please do. We don't mind. Just, there's families here, so just don't do it out in the open. At least not too hardcore. I don't know about you, but yeah.
You have the corset ones that are the tops.
Oh yeah, the historical. Of course, you have to. Of course, little Bobby might stare for a little while, and if you see the corset, people in the air and the girls are going, "Hello." So, anybody else like to add to either or? So, I actually don't know which one is more family friendly. I thought everybody would be historical, but we brought up some good points that historical can just be just as bad. So, not to mention, there's also, have you noticed people have been cosplaying Nazi uniforms lately?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some guy in the dealer room has that stuff.
they said, I know they say they only like the uniform, but still it's kind of like you gotta explain if somebody questions, so.
I've seen that guy at other cons. That does kind of discuss it for a little. Yeah.
And there is the risk of, misinterpreting, the risk of cultural appropriation, blackness, brownness.
Oh yeah, because there are people who do like tan their skin for cosplay sometimes, but sometimes people go, not you're fine, but there's sometimes people who go a little too far, and then like sometimes it's misinterpreted. That's a really, really touchy subject too, so that can also prove to be not as family friendly. So it's uneven, isn't it? So we'll just say both isn't quite as family friendly. Which one is easier to wear in public? Now this can be either like just wearing it yourself or being perceived in public as well. Historical.
Historical because you don't have the extra things around. You don't have the wings or the really heavy equipment on.
Yes.
At least in Austin, it's situational, depending on the day of the month. So, first Thursday, it would definitely be Fantastical.
It really depends on the cosplay too, how many layers you're wearing. I would argue that it would be easier to wear Fantastical because I've done a lot of historical pieces and I've done a lot of female historical pieces, and they would wear stacks and stacks of layers in really hot weather. And really restricted boning and multiple petticoats, and yeah. And if you think people crack their ribs in cosplays when they bind, nothing compared to historical stuff. So if you're going for historical accuracy, I wouldn't go that far for historical accuracy. Don't do anything to hurt yourself. So it just really depends. Anybody else like to add?
I think Fantastical might be easier to wear, like you said, because of all the different layers, but being perceived in public probably easier if it was historical, because depending on what time period you're going at, they won't think you're kind of out of place and then, oh, you just wear a snappy dress with it.
Yeah.
Or they can assume like, oh, you're part of a theater department. That's more easily perceived that you're part of a theater when you wear a historical piece.
Or else you get comments like, hey, how was your day yesterday? Or something. That's
Still so hard to bargain.
So I think more people are in favor that historical is more easier to wear in public. Is that what we're agreeing on? Which is easier to make?
Oh, God.
Yes, I would say Fantastical is easier to make simply like because I don't know price range. The really nice light and bright colored materials. Fabric stores love to sell those for cheap, so you can wear like a bright, colorful costume that fits a bright, colorful character, but like really like fabric that is meant to actually be for real clothes, like for historical pieces, that's just more expensive.
Fabric is always expensive.
Like poly satin versus synthetic wool.
You still with poly or satin?
Sometimes.
Okay, I can agree to that. I would just think your sewing machine is like, oh my god, she's sewing. I feel so sorry because it's so hard.
Yeah, it's like no, stop.
Fantastic is probably easier to make. Well, it depends on the time period. Or what the influences are. Because some
really depends.
Yeah, it's very kind of.
Area.
You have to be lucky. Lucky or have a lot of money.
That's true.
Fantastical. It has to be what you choose to wear. Like some of the giant suits of armor and fantastical stuff. That takes some things that you don't think about to use as pieces like EVA form. So how do you make EVA form look like Captain Shepard's armor suits?
I've seen some.
I just don't know how they do that. It's like the whole gradient stuff.
I knew one guy who made his suit armor out of hot glue and molding. It was amazing.
This is a shaky one too. Anybody else want to add to either or? You just don't like, it's just hard to decide, right?
Well, there's pick something ridiculous in Renaissance, or maybe you just pick something absurdly difficult.
It's hard to say which one is more easier to make. I know I have that problem too because I've done both, and there'll be like some days where this one's easier and some days this one's harder. So this one's an uneven one too. I think most of these are uneven ones.
It goes to the level of what you want.
Yes, there we go.
Like, do you want to make chainmail out of like the stuff they use in Lord of the Rings, the little rubber things, or do you want to use tint, or do you want to use Coke can tops? Because I remember some girl with Legend of Zelda, she did the chainmail out of Coke can tops.
Actually, let's do this. Let's say you're gonna make. Were you gonna make either a full Mobile Suit Gundam cosplay or a full Renaissance armor cosplay? Which is harder? Which one's easier?
Wait, when you say Renaissance armor, are we talking like chainmail?
Yes,
Gundam, I would go with.
I would rather make
that one's easier.
Because you don't have to smelt and make the metal.
Because I could mold it around
That's
my chair
$20,000.
suits. I could build a mold suit Gundam with my chairs and foundation. Can't do that with a suit of armor.
The suit of armor calculated at Legion Day money would be $20,000. That's buying it. Like if you can make yourself good luck to you, you got a smelter and a forge.
I know. I actually know somebody who used to attend Texas cons. He didn't know how to sew, but he was really good at blacksmithing, and he just like knew that like that. So like as if somebody who knew how to sew. So it just depends if what's your knack. But I guess we can say Fantastical is easier to make. I guess that's what we're going with because if we're going to a certain level. Which one has easier access to materials?
Fantastical. Fantastical.
Yes.
I would say historical actually, because most of that is going to be available at a clothing store or costuming shop. However, if we want to make perhaps Commander Shepard's outfit, we have to get a hold of the right material, one that's not too heavy, because a lot of people have a lot of plate on them for fantastical wear. So
It's also hard to figure out where to find it. Like Googling pages and pages, going through pages, like which one is the right one. Trying to find what is the best working on YouTube. Like sometimes on the YouTube channel they'll show like, here's how you do it, and they like you read it, you watch it, and you go, wait, how did you do that part? And then you just kind of glaze over that.
I think it's because they've gotten in their mind so far, like, it's just like, oh, they know this already, because I know this already. Anybody else want to add to that? Well, I think historical is easier access to materials, because there's some ridiculous outfits I've wanted to do in Fantastical that I have never found the materials for. So, you know.
Materials they haven't even invented.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Like stretched twill. They have not invented, they haven't, there's some twill that has a little bit of stretch, but not exactly stretched twill. That needs to be invented. Because I notice a lot of pattern companies, they're tending to go more towards historical patterns. I think it was Buttermilk, I think that was the company that's mainly focused their costume patterns that they sell as primarily period piece historical, and then they have some fantastical at the end, but it's mainly pretty accurate stuff. And you see more of that too. But sometimes a lot of the patterns aren't as historically accurate as they claim to be. So that's still a little bit more fantastical. But I think historical.
I think one of the things also is that historical versus classical when it comes to the fabrics that companies sell, they're probably just going for an easier group with historical because there's historical, that's set, and fantastical is this giant unknown area that they may not want to step into because they lose a lot of money.
It really depends. It's either a hit and miss with the fantastical costume because they don't really know.
They don't do the research on
which
area they're going to hit, like sci-fi, fantasy, or medieval fantasy.
I think it also depends on the area that sells it too, because depending on what country, I know Brazil, they sell a lot more variations of fabrics that you can use for fantastical. Of course, Japan as well, and mainly the fashion capitals of the world is where you get more access to different materials. Yes.
Yeah, I was just saying, yeah, I agree, because if you want to make a historical costume, you can go to a sewing store and get pretty much most, if not all of what you need, fabric, patterns, all sorts of everything else. Most of what you need in one place, or if you're doing a fantastic costume, you could go to a fabric store, you could end up going to like Home Depot, and then have to order from 3 different online shops, and still not have everything you need, depending on what you're doing.
That is true. And when you talk to people who work in fabric stores and places that specialize in that, they are more likely to picture the historical costume than they are the fantastical costume. So they'll be more likely to help you out with what you need for a historical piece. Anybody else?
Well, the other thing too, with access, there are ready-made markets out there for the historical stuff. Because you have Civil War reenactors, and you have Renaissance fair people who are going to buy these patterns.
That is true, and there are specific companies that focus on making historical costumes for like theaters and of course Civil War reenactments, because those are the big things. Anyone else want to add to that? Okay, so who do you think is easier? Who do you think won for this? Historical or fantastical? Historical is a little bit easier. Which is more kid-friendly. Now I said family-friendly, but now I'm going to say kid-friendly, kid-specific, child-specific.
I will have to say fantastical, because fantastical, like when kids hear the word fantasy, oh, they think princesses and knights and, well, they might like hobbits and just like all these little fantasy stories that are told mainly for kids, while when it comes to historical, they think, oh, boring history textbooks that they don't want to read. So I think kids really get into the fantasy world.
Unless you get into Italian. I'm just kidding. Yes. Oh yeah, you are. Hi. Well, that one I argue because sometimes the outfits go a little bit off of historical accuracy.
Yeah. This one took me like, I found this at a thrift shop. This one was on Etsy. The pants were from Amazon. The boots were from eBay. And the shirt and tie were from Etsy.
That's cool. You went to different stores.
Yeah.
So you had a little bit of trouble finding all this.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody want to add to which is more kid? Yes, you.
I would just say that to be historically
little adults. They're dressed just like adults. It's not a simpler pattern or simpler idea with their outfits, especially among, nobility or higher classes. When you look at the portraits, the child's picture and dress is very similar to the adult's picture and dress. So if we're going on difficulty based on how much more it's going to take to make a child's costume, historically probably going to be slightly more difficult.
That's a good point.
The kids won't like wearing it as much either.
With fantasy costumes, the period accurate costumes, it doesn't have to be wool. You can get away with putting zippers in it. The fantasy stuff. I mean, if you're doing period accurate stuff, it's like you pick a certain time, it's like, well, it laces up. Or no zippers, no buttons, no, this is going to take so much effort to get the kid into the costume. And it's wool. Yeah.
I think also for fantasy, it has to do with like their imagination and stuff. Say if they watch Dragon Ball Z, they want to be Goku, or they want to be Piccolo or something. It's going to be more fun for them. They can do a little bit more something.
Again, no one could say you're inducing violence and you're buying stuff. I'm not saying like either or is worse than the other. I'm just trying to bring up different points for each side. Anyone else? Yes.
Allow me to give you a scenario. Hey kiddo, would you like to be Henry VIII or Pikachu for Halloween? Who's Henry VIII?
Sadly, there are a lot of kids who will say. Well, yeah, he's not really the best figure in the world. Anyone else? Okay, so what do we say? Which is more kid-friendly? Fantastical. It's who wants to be Spider-Man? Who wants to be Batman? Who wants to be Superman? Kids do. Which is more admired by public?
Historical.
Why is that?
It brings a certain class and calling back to like old times. Something people would think is simpler.
Nostalgic?
Yeah, nostalgic. Like dressing up and like people dress up. People like man people are kind of nostalgic for that era kind of clothing, or early 19th century clothing that they see from old pictures. They think, oh, that's nice. That looks like very nice clothing. While I've noticed wearing cosplay, being out, people kind of stare at you. What are you?
I've noticed a lady who guided their child away from the convention area. I was like, oh, that's kind of, and right next to mainly Disney princesses, and like, but I guess it's how they raise their children, so.
So, like, it's easy that sometimes what the public perceives as historical wear is actually fantastical wear. Like, the more subtler end of the student stuff, for example, with, somebody not as well versed as steampunk based on that, it's like, oh, it's like, that's Victorian wear, and it's like, not necessarily.
Although, while like when we say the public, we think like people who don't go to cons, but in a sense, when you include those who do go to cons, and even some people they don't go to cons, but they still think it's interesting. Basically, the costumes that get the most attention, because the fantastical ones, as we discussed, like maybe like they're harder to do, they actually get a lot more attention when they're done right. So people are like, oh wow, you look amazing in this big like fantasy elf costume. And if someone does like a really good, maybe just like a Civil War era costume, or unless it's like if it's not a big costume historically, then I'll just be like, oh, that's nice, but it's not like literally fantastic as fantastical costumes can tend to be.
I guess if you're wearing a historical, they can say, oh, well, that's a really nice set of clothes you have. But if you're wearing a big Gundam suit, wow, how did you do that?
Yes.
I think with shows such as, was it Stars of Cosplay and Face Off, more people.
Heroes of Cosplay.
Heroes, sorry.
Let's not
But
start.
that's
Hold up,
still
we're gonna weekend.
Hold up. I think more people are becoming aware of fantastical cosplay as a serious thing, but it's still seen somewhat as a sideshow. It's taken less seriously until you get to something like a full-on working Gundam cosplay. And then I think they're more impressed with the fact that you've taken an idea from fantasy and really brought it to life, but far less impressed with the fact that there is a Gundam walking about. It's more the fact that you've done something which they didn't think anybody would do. So,
That's an interesting point. But it is, like, even if, you can also argue, even if it's admired by the public, it can be seen as a sideshow, like you said. Like, it's, so is it a good thing that it's admired by the public? You don't necessarily know if they're just treating it like, oh, look at those freaks over there.
Wow, that person wasted a lot of time on that giant robot.
Oh my god, how can they waste their lives and money on this?
Does this person have a job?
Like a legit job.
It's kind of the thing of people somebody walks around as Batman or Joker, like they know who that is, and like, that's cool, but it's like, why are they spending their time on it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure everybody's heard this before. But then I like to argue, do you like to go to concerts? Do you like to go on vacations? Do you like to go see your certain sports team at the game? Well, this is basically our biggest sports event. So, but that's getting a little off topic. So, anybody else want to add to that? I guess that's it. So, what would we say is more admired by the public? It's just historical or fantastical? You would say fantastical? I made it kind of sad. I didn't make it sound kind of sad.
I think like what you were saying earlier, it's kind of hit or miss with fantasy, whereas a lot of the times historical is more consistent with what people think.
That's true. Which is used in movies and shows more. Yes.
They're attempting to be the historically accurate. Fantasy is just more accessible. There's less research that has to be done. There's just lots of characters.
I noticed that happen a lot.
Or that Once Upon a Time from Disney, it's like they just kind of cherry picked old stories and threw them at.
Oh, this looks like it's Camilla with looks Sinister. Looks like it could be a pretty princess. We just throw that in there. So, but you notice in the past they used to do it a lot more accurate, but not as much these days. Like I think it's because I don't want to admit it. I guess sometimes, the research might be a bit easier, and because if it's the show that's creating the look, they don't have to do as much research. They can just do their own thing.
I would say like the last maybe TV show that did a full-on historical basis would be Shogun. There's a whole Shogun in the 80s, Samurai Japan, and maybe a new one that's fictional, but is they kind of lean on the historical more is Vikings. Even though it's the only thing History Channel makes that's worthwhile watching.
Yes.
I think Fantastical, like depending on your audiences, like Fantastical appeals more to like, I think that appeals to more people. Like it seems like, oh, what regular movies are like popcorn movies. will probably have elements of fantasy in them. But if the show wants to be like kind of high class, like Oscar bait kind of movie, then they're definitely going to go for historical.
What about shows that do reenactments, like History Channel and stuff like that?
History Channel.
It's like it's
History Channel, and now it's
Let's
like
say the Military Channel.
Dumb.
Military Channel.
Oh, that's a story.
That's not much of a channel anymore.
Yeah, it's really not. None of them are much of
What was
a.
it?
And you're pulling out your hair over there. You alright?
I'm sorry, you bring up the History Channel, she's aliens.
I haven't watched it. I haven't watched it in recent years. I haven't watched it in recent years. I remember watching it like 10 years ago when it was history.
Aliens and not
Concepts.
Well, it's always Nazis and Romans. That's all.
Nazis.
Yes, the historical stuff is on
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to give him a headache. But I was.
Yeah, because HBO, that's on Netflix, and HBO will
HBO has
never allow it
Game of
again.
Thrones, so.
I shouldn't have used History Channels there.
There was the miniseries Hatfields and McCoy.
Oh, yeah.
But that was
Pretty good.
that was done by that wasn't made by History Channel though. That was thrown around by the guy Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner did it.
But it
And he
was the outfits in it. The outfits in it were really. I mean, I don't know how much research went into it, but the pieces felt very much like from that era.
Yeah, those
After
were-
the Civil War, right? Or
Yeah, that was right after the Civil War.
it was
It's good.
So, anyone else want to add to that?
We also have westerns.
Westerns are like one of the most historically accurate I've seen.
I like Hell on Wheels. Hell on Wheels is pretty accurate.
Yes.
Actually, I would say those are more fantastical, especially like with the characters. Like, sure, we imagine cowboys all wearing what we think of as a cowboy hat, but actually they wore all these different hats, like other things than cowboy hats, and it wasn't all like gunfights, and especially the Indians probably look nothing like westerns make Indians look like.
Well, that would be like 1950s, 60s, early westerns.
Current westerns. I should have said current westerns. Like Tombstone. Tombstone's a good example.
Hell on Wheels also
Or
does a
the
good.
new trigger.
What was that?
Hell on Wheels does a good job of differentiating the Indians. Like this one character, he's Cheyenne, but he's a Christian. He lives with everyone else. He left his tribe, and at one point there are the Sioux that are attacking the railroads, and he's like, "I'm not a Sioux. I'm Cheyenne. Leave me alone." And he wears Western. He wears regular. He doesn't wear Indian clothing. He wears Western attire.
I used to be a cowboy, so I like the Western club.
Completely fantastic.
Oh my gosh, I will agree, that is nothing but fantastical. Oh my gosh, if you want to, don't see that movie, see Pacific Rim instead, if you want to see good fantastical costumes. Oh my gosh, no. No. Okay, which is more enjoyable to be in? It could be just to wear or just to parade around it. Yes, all the way back there.
I would argue that a fantastical, not quite historical, is more enjoyable to be in from a cosplayer standpoint, because when you're doing an accurate historical costume, you have to worry about accurate historical undergarments, which are not exactly, some of the fibers they're made of are not quite as comfortable as modern undergarments, some of the boning material, and because you need them to create a proper shape, especially if you're doing Victorian era, and it's just, sometimes that can be really terrible. Now if you're in a historical, fantastical costume, you don't, you can fudge that. You just are like, oh, whatever, this doesn't have to, I can wear my Spanx instead, or something like that. So, that's my,
But what about binders?
I mean, I wear that anyways. I'm not gonna do the Shakespearean method on that because that would crack my ribs. So.
That's true. We think we talked about before that a lot of the boning and stuff from historical outfits did cause damage. So I would, if you're doing historical, don't too historical where it's gonna hurt you. Anybody else want to add to that?
This kind of goes with the earlier thing about which is more socially acceptable. But it is a lot of fun to get all these weird looks whenever you're walking down with something that's really strange.
Sure. If you like getting attention, sure.
I was wearing a Soul Eater costume at school one day, Professor Einstein, and I walked into the cafeteria, and I just felt every single eye on me because I had like the gear head and I had the white coat and everything, and it's like I can feel every single person looking at me.
Feed me your attention.
My whole feeling is I'm gonna get stared at anyway because I'm in a chair. I might as well give them an interesting view while they're looking at me. So a fantastical costume is gonna take, all of that staring that would otherwise make you feel subconscious and turn it into something positive and powerful. And if it makes them smile, then that's like bonus.
I just want to add to the other side as well. Historical, what I like about wearing that, a lot of the attire for historical, it gives you kind of like a posh, elegant kind of feel whenever you wear it. And you just feel like, oh my gosh, I'm suddenly this upper class aristocrat.
It makes you feel
Prestige.
like you should have power armor or something.
Yes.
So happy.
There's a masquerade ball tonight.
Oh yeah.
But that's just one of the things you can think about historical, like, oh, I'm this prestigious, or if you dress in the Civil War, like, oh, I'm dressing as this hero, or oh, other things. Anyone else want to add to that? Well, I think Fantastical wins this debate right here. So, let me see. I think we have one more. Which is better overall?
Neither.
Neither. Who said neither?
Dean said
That dude.
neither.
No one cares about you, Dee.
Oh, thanks.
I care.
Thank you, Chris.
Why do you say neither?
Just because it's like comparing apples and oranges or Star Trek and Star Wars. They both have different merits for different reasons, and they can never be totally compared because they're not quite the same. So you can't grade them on the same scale.
Anyone else? Kind of just summed it up right there.
Yeah, one of them, I gotta say, is pretty gosh darn fantastic.
You see what you did there. Well, basically, I didn't want to make this where it was just a one side is better than the other. I just want to see everybody else's viewpoints on this about specific topics, which is more acceptable in society, and it's good to see other cosplayers have different viewpoints on which is better, which is in certain aspects, and a lot of stuff was tied because it's hard to pick between the two. Believe it or not, you think, how many of you came in here thinking you specifically only liked one over the other? Well, no, you all have pretty open mind about both then, right? That's good.
There's a time and place for each one. Like you could do, say you go to Comic-Con, you want to make the best, most fantastical looking costume you can make, kind of like a DC, or like you want to be like who's one of the Superman villains. Well, not one of the.
Doc Ock, Lex Luthor?
No, one of the alien. One of the aliens.
I know who you're talking about.
He's got the
Brainiac?
Brainiac.
He's got like the bone sticking out of his armor. Doomsday, yeah.
Yes.
You want to make something like Doomsday, and that's for Comic-Con. You want to show off that, or you want to go to, or you just feel like walking around town. You feel like walking around out in period clothing, and people knows you. And it's like that guy knows how to dress.
Like Mad Men or something like
Yeah.
that. Yes.
I think we can see that these two are always like, you never you can never really say which one is better, especially when it comes to Shakespeare plays, because now they're done in a whole bunch of different styles. A lot of people like to do, the classic Shakespeare, where it's all period in Elizabethan clothing, but other people love to take Shakespeare and just totally add this fantasy element, like all the costumes and the sets are fantastical, but it's still the Shakespeare dialogue. And so you can't really say which one, like, there's regular classic Hamlet versus what I've seen a lot of apocalyptic Hamlet.
Or the Royal Shakespeare Company even did modern day Hamlet. That was their most recent production of it, was set in modern time.
Or The Tempest, or Midsummer Night's Dream, which are already fantastical elements, and they just have costumes that reflect that.
That's true. Well, they gave me the warning that it's about time to wrap up, so thank you all for coming, and I'm glad there's cosplayers that are pretty open-minded to both, because both are really good. So, I'm sorry if I tried to make you pick one over the other. Really, that wasn't my goal. Y'all have a good night, enjoy the rest of the con.